Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Matthew, and I'm here to talk about why and how to complete your textbook outlines. This is one of the most common questions we get at the beginning of the school year, particularly in honors biology, about the homework that we'll assign, usually 3 and sometimes even 4 times a week, to complete textbook outlines of different sections within your honors biology textbook. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about why we assign these and what we hope you get out of them. Also, a couple of tips about how to get started. So, why textbook outlines? So, one of the things that we have are several goals about what you might get out of textbook outlines. One of those things is that we want you to be able to use a text and get information out of that. And we found that through repeated practice, you can actually develop the skills about how to extract information from a written text. Now, you may not be extracting information from textbooks for your entire life, but ability to read and read thoughtfully and extract key pieces of information is something that we hope that you develop. And we found that textbook outlines are a focused practice strategy that allows you to do that. It may not be a strategy that everyone finds to be the most useful way, but by using this as a repeated practice throughout the year, you will be able to hone this skill so that going forward, you will be able to decide if this is a strategy that is useful for you in future classes or potentially in college. We also really find it important to preload key concepts before class discussions, activities, and labs. And so this is why we actually assign the homework when we do, and that is so that you will be familiar with the key concepts before we come in and do something in class. If you've been exposed to the key vocabulary and the key concepts, it allows you to engage more deeply in the class activities. Rather than spending large sums of time telling you definitions, the hope is that you will have already thought about these concepts, and once that you utilize them in a class activity, you'll get more out of the activity and you will deepen your understanding of what's going on. They also serve as a primary source for studying, whether it's getting ready for a unit exam, a mid-year exam, a final, or an SAT biology exam. When you couple these outlines that you have put in a notebook with the learning objectives, it will provide a really nice, clean resource that you won't have to lug your textbook around, but rather you'll have a handy, small, reduced set of notes that you can refer to. Also, because you will have previous units, you'll be able to flip back and look at previous unit objectives as well, and maybe some of those key connections. So, how do you go about taking outlines? So these are going to be more in the general guideline case. We sort of expect everyone is going to develop their own style as you go. There are systems of taking outlines. So you will see there are 2-column styles. There are various bulleted styles, and you could go online and you'll find dozens of different systems. I'm going to paint some generic guidelines that I think you should try to use to start. Again, you may want to check in with your teacher about individual expectations for what they expect for you to do. So my first recommendation is write. Do not type your notes. If you've been paying any attention to the news the last few years, you may have seen articles in Scientific American or in the Wall Street Journal or stories on NPR, all highlighting how students who write down handwritten notes as opposed to students who type notes retain information better. There's something about the process of handwriting notes that on average helps students retain information better. Is this going to be true for every single individual student? No. But similar to the idea of we want you to have sustained practice, we'd like you to try the sustained practice of handwriting notes over the course of a year to see if, in fact, you are going to be able to get a little bit more out of this process. So I recommend that you write, don't type. Individual teachers may have different policies on this. You may want to check with your individual teacher. The next thing I recommend is that use a consistent notebook, ideally separate from other subjects and class notes. I am a big fan of your marble style composition notebooks. You will see later on in my example notes that I took, I use a composition notebook. This allows you to have all your notes in one place. Perhaps you'll get to 2 of them throughout the year, but I strongly recommend that you use a single notebook for this and that you don't blend in class notes. You keep this as a separate assignment text. Use a structure that separates main ideas from details. So this is usually done in one of two ways. The primary way this is done is using indentations and bullets. So for example, on the first line, I might write the title of the section and what section I'm doing. And then the next key idea, I will indent slightly and I will write the main key idea. And if there's a couple of definitions that are below that, I would indent a little bit more and write those ideas below. Use your own words whenever possible. Rather than just blindly copying down information that comes right out of the textbook and using the textbook author's word choice, I do recommend that you use your own wording whenever you can. I'll come back to this in a little bit. Use underlining and or color to help key points stand out. Later on, you'll notice I used all of my outlining in a single color, my standard green pen that I usually take most of my notes in. Really, I actually do prefer in class notes to have a second or sometimes even a third pen to underline, to highlight, to asterisk, to that sort of thing. It is really useful to make little marks to help things stand out. This also brings up the point that you probably don't want your notes super crowded, so you can add additional notes in and around the existing notes that you are putting down. And then last point here is use diagrams when a picture tells a better story than text. And what I mean here is if you've got a flow diagram that the textbook has used in the margins that really illustrate the 2 paragraphs of text, don't try to re-summarize those 2 paragraphs of text. Use a diagram, copy the diagram down and use that. I personally am a terrible artist. I know that many of my students are phenomenal artists and they can draw really well, and they can also draw fairly quickly. I'm not telling you that you all need to be great artists as you go, but what I am saying is that when you can do a flow diagram to show how ideas are connected or concepts are connected, or how one compound goes into another compound through a set of reactions, perhaps use the picture that is there rather than writing out the text. Pictures really do illuminate things quite well. At the same time, don't get bogged down too much on the diagrams. I would say using shapes and circles rather than drawing out animals or plants is sometimes useful if you just want to show the main key ideas. All right, so before I show you an example of how I went about taking notes, I want to talk a little bit about that concept of using your own words whenever possible. Now, one of the big things about this, and I'm sure you've heard this, write in your own words, and you might wonder, how do you go about doing this? And so there's a couple of ways of getting deeper meaning from reading and outlining text. And the key thing is that what you should do is, rather than just taking the words off the page, think about extending or connecting the words that you're using into either things that you've already learned or questions that they spark. So what do I mean by that? So after you write something down, you might say, how are the ideas and information presented connected to what you already know? I am going to give you an example of that when I show the notes. And as you go through the year, you will really be able to extend this dramatically because we're going to add lots and lots of concepts that are related to biology. And as we layer on new concepts, there'll be a lot of things to reflect back to that are connected to previous ideas that we're going to be building on. If you can think 3 or 4 times throughout a outlining, how is this connected to previous things? That is going to allow you to be ready to talk about some of the deep conversations we're going to have in class. Another question you can ask is, what new ideas did you get that extended or broadened your thinking in new directions? So you might see something and now you're going to broaden a definition that you've previously considered. Again, this will be difficult in the first couple of units because we're really not going to have a broad foundation. But when you get a couple of sections in or a couple of units in, you might start to broaden a definition that we have talked about during ecosystems when we get into matter and energy. And you might think about something a little bit more broadly that we discussed, and it fills out or elaborates on a concept that you've learned a little bit more. And then lastly, what challenges or puzzles have come to mind from the ideas and information presented? And really, this is sort of like wait a minute, I had to stop and think. And I'll give an example of that when I show you my example of notes. So next I'm going to show you an example of me taking notes from chapter 36, and I'm going to outline two sections just as I would assign you guys for homework, and I will highlight some of these key pieces to help you get started. So what I have here is a homework assignment that is set up for middle of Unit 1. It's reading and outlining chapter 36.1 and 36.2. So I've got my book set up here in a nice clean workspace. I've got my handy dandy composition notebook where I'm going to take all of my outlines for the year. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start setting this up so that I can take my notes and sort of show you what the general flow would be of a chapter outline or a couple of section outlines. So this is going to be 36.1, just feeding relationships. Determine the path of energy and chemicals in the ecosystem. So that's the title of the section, so I'm going to title my notes that way. And then what I'm going to do is just I'm going to sort of go through part by part. I'm going to read through, and then as I go, I'm going to basically make a note of any of the important section headings. So first section heading is going to be energy, flow, and chemical cycling. And as I read through this section, there's a couple of key things that I note. It says every organism requires energy to carry out life processes such as growing, moving, and reproducing. So I'm going to summarize that. All organisms need energy. And I'm going to put in parentheses for growing, moving, reproducing, etc. And then I see that there's a couple of definitions in here that follow under here, and those are producers, consumers, and decomposers. So I'm going to indent again. I'm going to write producers. We underline that, and I'm going to do my definition. Convert light energy to chemical energy. Write plants here because they give plants as an example. And I'm going to do next definition is consumers. They get energy by consuming other organisms. And then I'm going to have the last grouping, that's the decomposers. Oh, and I would say something like, this could be like an animal would do this. They don't say that. They don't give actually specific examples of organism. So maybe I write animals, and maybe I write a question. Maybe that's something I'd ask in class. And then I've got decomposers, and it says break down waste and dead organisms. So they get energy from waste and dead organisms. Now, as I've done this, I've written down a couple of key definitions, and I'm already sort of starting to think a little bit. We haven't been very deep into the year. We talked a little bit about ecosystems already, but I'm wondering, wait a minute, decomposers eat waste and dead organisms. Those dead organisms might be plants, they might be animals. I wonder if decomposers are a type of consumer. And so I might even make a little bit of a note here of a question. This is sort of that example of a connection that I'm making. And I might bring this up in class, because if decomposers aren't making their own food, producers seem to be converting light in there, and decomposers are doing something different. Decomposers may be an example of a type of consumer, or should I not think that way? So I'm going to rate that. And then again, this is the kind of thing that I might bring up in class, or maybe it's going to come up in class, I don't know, but it's that opportunity to make a connection, maybe extend my thinking as I go, thinking about the things that I'm writing down. So what I want you to note here is that I'm not like looking to extend every single thing down I write. I'm trying the best I can to convert the material that I'm writing down into a reasonable, reasonable conversion to my own language. And then I'm making a couple of questions down. I'm not getting crazy about what it is that I'm writing down. So I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to finish this section, and I'm going to come back. I'll take a note of the time and how long it takes, and give you a sense of how long it took to do these two sections. I'm going a little bit slower than I would if I was doing this as my own homework, but I would like to show what the final might look like. So I've now finished my two sections. It took me about half an hour or so, a little bit slow. I did get a couple of interruptions, as you will recognize that happens when you're doing your homework, but it took me about half an hour to do these sections. This was 7 pages of textbook, and I did a few pictures, and I am very, very sloppy and slow at drawing. So some of you guys might take a little more time than that. Some might take a little less. But what you'll notice is that I've got 4 pages of notes. I don't know if you can see all of those details, but 4 pages of notes from 7 pages of text. I did draw a couple of pictures. I wrote down about 4 questions, so about one question per page, different ideas that came out. I tried to mix my font. I tried to underline. Honestly, I probably would like to go back with a second color marker or pen to highlight a couple of different pieces. I found myself making connections. So for example, one place was talking about chemicals can be recycled between living and non-living parts of the ecosystem. And I know that in one of the recent homework sections, there was a whole section on biotic and abiotic factors. So I made a little note and made a note about abiotic and biotic factors that we did previously in the unit. And then another place that I came up with was they were talking about light as a limiting factor in primary productivity. And I remembered limiting factors coming back when we talked about that same section on biotic and abiotic factors and limiting factors to population growth. So I made a connection there that light as a limiting factor as it related to what we had talked about earlier. Obviously, as you go deeper into the year, there's more content that we've discussed throughout the year, and there'll be more ability to make connections. But this should give you a general idea, and if you'd like to check in with your teacher for other examples. Hopefully this gets you started on how to set up your outlines.